You got the extenders in place. Only thing is once I got them secured down, they weren't really in great alignment with the brace up top, or some of them weren't. So what I'm doing is I'm going back through with the level, lining them up, and adjusting them. I'll show you how I do that. So it should sit like that. So what I'm going to do in order to adjust that and bring this up a little bit is I'm going to adjust the bracket there in the back. And how I'm going to do that, because obviously I don't have enough room to get my hand in there, is I don't even know what it's called, but get this attachment on my drill. Obviously allows me to stick that drill in there and then make that adjustment on the screw. And I'll loosen that screw up and then pull the shelf out a little bit and then tighten it back up. I got to use two hands on this because the one thing about this 90-degree bit here is that I got to stick some needle nose pliers back in there to hold it in place, because it'll turn if you're not holding it. You get that loosened up, and I can just kind of pull back a little bit. Yeah, see, it's got a little bit of give, so I'll see if I can pull this back and get it lined up, and then screw that back down. So I've got this all aligned now, and so I'm going to go ahead and move on down where the kick plate's going to go, or a baseboard. In order to put that down there and give you something to nail the baseboard to, I'm putting some wood. So what I did is I just measured the depth of this, and then I milled some scrap wood. It's just got to slip in here. Drilled some holes, and I'm going to just screw those in to the actual billy shelf. So that'll just give me more surface area when I hit that baseboard with a nail gun to secure the baseboard down. I'll be able to nail it here and then there and then on the sides as well. I got those bottom mounting boards in place, and as we talked about, have the brace up there, so both of those serve to allow me to mount the trim to the billy shelves. Now I got to work on the side. So the side, there's a big enough gap there that when I put the trim in place, I potentially risk the trim bending inward. This is going to be the only surface it can mount to. So in order to alleviate that and give it more surface area, I'm just going to put some construction adhesive on this wood here and then mount it in there. I got some Loctite construction adhesive, so I'm just going to smear that here on the side. It's going to be some work getting this out of here, but I'll get it out. Okay, I'll slide this in here. Hopefully without making a mess. Okay, and I don't have to worry about the glue smearing. I'm gonna spread it out, but I don't have to worry about it being on the front here because trim will be up here in front. Looks like that should work pretty well. I got all the pieces in place so that I can begin working on the trim. The wood over here that I glued on the sides, that construction adhesive works really good. That stuff is on there solid. I got some trim up against baseboard. What I'm going to do now is mark off on the baseboard where I need to cut. And fits. Okay, so first up with setting this bottom piece of trim, I am getting it level. I've already made it level, and what I'm going to do is make a device out of this pencil and this wood here. I'm going to elevate the pencil to where it's at the bottom of the trim, and then I'm going to tape it to the wood, and then it'll be locked in place. Then I'm going to go through and just mark this using that as the guide, and what that does is when I cut based on that line, I'll be able to set this down and it'll be level. So the floor starts high over here in the middle and then it goes down. So that's why you have such a big gap. When I level this, there's a big gap there. By cutting this in accordance with that guide that I make, I'll be able to set this flush and it'll remain level. Okay, so you can see my line there, and as I get over here, as we see the floor start to lower, my line starts to get lower. So I should be able to cut that off and this fit in here really nicely. I actually already got started. What I'm doing now is I'm making a rough cut to clean off all the stuff below where I marked at. So I'm just doing a rough cut, as you can see, cleaning that off, and then I'm gonna use my router to make it nice and clean. What I've done now is I've clamped a guide onto my trim, and so I've lined up the guide in accordance with the pencil line. And so what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna take my router and I'm gonna trim it off up until this mark right here where the line veers off from the guide. Once I make that first cut, then I'll readjust the guide to where the line sits at. So I'll just kind of adjust it as I go and use the router to clean this up. Okay, so that worked out really well. It's nice and clean, and then you can see where I stopped up here. So I'll go ahead and adjust the guide and get the rest of this cleaned off. Okay, so that's what it looks like. It's close to being perfectly level, a little off, but I'm gonna go with that because it requires me, if I'm gonna make it perfectly level, I'm gonna have to drop the far end, and that shelf's a little higher. So the farther I drop that, the greater difference between the trim board and that bottom shelf there. So I just seated that second piece in there. The alignment's pretty good. It's not perfect, but I can live with it. Once I get that nailed in, I'm going to start working on a piece that will provide a nice transition between the bottom shelf and the trim here, because obviously it doesn't have a finished look. There's a gap in there. This is how I finished off this bottom trim piece. So I'll show you what I did here. So the sides of the Billy shelves, they stick out a little bit from the shelves. So I had to mark that off, figure out the depth, and make some notches. The other thing I did to this is that it's here at the bottom, so we didn't want like a sharp corner. So you can see that I put a 45-degree beveled edge there on the sides of these. Now you can see that this is at a 45-degree angle. That's because it's going to receive the next one. So I'll show you how I put this one on now that I've gone through the process of doing this first one. So for the next step, I take the speed square and put it here on the side. Then I can mark off where to put that indentation. And I'll do the same thing on the other side and on all other sides on down this piece. Then I'm going to take the speed square and I'm going to mark all sides of where that line is. And the reason for that is when I put this on the table saw to cut that notch out, having lines on all sides tells me if I am in the right spot as I'm running this over the saw. Although I've already done this with another piece of wood, I just want to show you how to go about figuring out how deep you need to make the notch. Essentially, you just take a piece of wood and push it up against the shelf and against the side so that you can capture the difference there just by marking it just like that. So here's the piece of wood that I use to lower my saw to the right height in order to make that notch. This is the routing bit that I use to bevel those edges. So I got the bottom trim all done, and I'm going to go ahead and move up to the top and do this upper trim piece.